My name's Chris Bryant, and I'm the Minister for the Creative Industries, and this is First Draft, the podcast that tries to champion the creative industries in this country. And today, I'm with David Morrissey, the actor. Well, David Morrissey, it's great to have you here. It's really odd for me, because I can't remember how we met.
Yeah, I can't either. I mean, it was a while ago, though, wasn't it? It was a long time
I feel as if
ago.
we've known each other for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And obviously, we've been engaged in similar campaigns around the arts and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but it was a while ago, so I'm not sure when we first met, but yeah, we've known each other for a long time.
Now, you're an actor, and you said,
am.
I'm not telling you something you don't know.
You've done your research.
I have done my research, but you said earlier that you don't like being on camera.
Yeah, well, as myself, yeah, I'm not that comfortable like being myself really, or just being on camera. I have to do it a lot, I have to promote stuff I'm in, and and obviously I do some campaigns and stuff. But yeah, I do always find it tricky, and I find it a bit strange. In my early career, I never did any publicity really. I never did any sort of promotion. Now you have to. It's sort of part of your
It's part
job.
of the contract.
Yeah, you have to do it now, and obviously the world's changed so much. But I never really wanted to get in the way of the characters I played. I didn't want people to know me and sort of then see the character and think, oh, I know that guy. He was on the radio the other day or whatever. So I deliberately kept away from that. But then after a while, sort of about 15 years or something, and then I thought, well, my work can speak for me. I can sort of break that fourth wall a little bit. But I still find it, even just before we walked on here, I do feel a little nervous around it, yeah.
And is that why you're an actor?
There's many reasons for that, really. I think it was my passion. I can't remember ever wanting to do anything else. I had an idea of, if it didn't work out, I'd have to find another career. But I did that thing which you're told never to do, which is I put all my eggs in one basket, which was basically to be an actor. But the good thing about that was it meant that I held that basket very carefully. I wasn't sort of.
But did that start at school then?
It started at junior school when I was
Your first tap dancing routine was at the age of 4.
No, I didn't have anything like that. But I did do at junior school. We did a couple of plays, and I did. I was the Scarecrow in the Wizard of Oz, which I really loved doing. I did this sort of nativity play. We had a really great teacher at my junior school, who was very not just she was sort of did the plays and stuff, but we had great art teachers and stuff like that as well. It was a very creative place. And I think looking back on it, they were all quite hippies, they were they were coming from that place, this would have been sort of early 70s. So they were coming out of the 60s, and they had that ethos, I think, music, art and theatre and stuff. And then I did that terrible thing, which we'll probably talk about later, which is the 11 plus.
Right.
So I had an 11 plus test and I failed. And I didn't go to a grammar school or a comprehensive or whatever. I went to a secondary modern in Liverpool. And that was, it was fine, but they didn't do any arts. They really didn't do plays or stuff like that. The clue is in the title. I was in a secondary modern. So it always felt very secondary to everything else. And I'm the youngest of 4 children, and my 3 siblings went to grammar schools in Liverpool. And I had mates who were in grammar school or comprehensive, the guys I was at junior school with who'd sort of passed the 11 plus. But also it wasn't just to do with that. It was to do with my school. I've said this in the past. It was very sort of reminiscent to me of the film Kes.
Right. So
the idea of education and being curious and putting your hand up in class, and it was very difficult because it wasn't encouraged by the people around me as well as the teachers.
Right.
It was sort of even the best teachers were struggling in a way because of resources and stuff like that. But it was like it was a place to keep your head down. I felt
it always felt to me as if the whole concept of the 11 plus sort of turned people into second-class citizens
Yeah,
in the educational sphere. Though you could argue that, the theory was that people will be going into different styles of education which would be better suited to them.
I don't think that really worked. That was probably where it came out of. But for me, and sort of for my parents as well, I really still see the disappointment in my mother's face when I failed, and how, that was a worry for her. I found out later that my eldest brother also failed the 11 plus, but my mum went to the grammar school where we used to live. We'd moved by the time I had my 11 plus, and she really badgered them to get him in, and she did get him in. So he went to a grammar school, even though he'd failed the 11 plus.
But is that
I don't know how she did it, but she
didn't badger for you?
But she did, but the schools weren't really around.
Right.
Really. So I think she really did, but it didn't work for me, how much I think she really did try to do that. But it felt for me that I wore that failure. And I got very angry about it later on, because it sort of hit me that I was struggling in terms of where my placement was in society, who I was, what I wanted to do, the achievability of my ambitions and stuff. And I felt very sort of thrown by that period in my life, which was 4 or 5 years of real. It was a difficult time for me.
Right.
I did feel like I think now I have, reading was not encouraged in that way, and now I read all the time. I wasn't very I buttoned my mouth. It was easier for me to be the clown of the class rather than sort of curious and sort of educating, jump into education like I wanted. And therefore that sort of secondary moniker, I felt I had that for a long time. I did feel that I had this second-class citizen thing in my head a little bit. It changed. And then also, to be honest, that's also at one point changed into this massive chip on my shoulder.
Right.
Where I was slightly at the world. I was slightly angry at the world. I was going to prove myself, which, had some advantages to it as well. There was a motor there for me to try and sort of, put 2 fingers up at the things that had happened to me. But also that was a front, and underneath that front was this real fear and insecurity and anxiety. And that comes and goes now still, I still feel that around that.
And sometimes in the characters that you've played, it feels as if that chippiness, it comes out. It's something that you play to.
Yeah, you look at characters, you look at things that, you can bring to a character. There's 2 types of work sometimes. Actors will look at a character and think, how can this character be like me? And I tend to look at a character and think, how can I be like him?
Right.
But you still bring stuff of your own. In the way I work backstory, when I look at characters, I tend to look at what are they frightened of? What are they ashamed of? What are they worried that the world will discover about them? What are they hiding? What role are they playing in their life? And I think those questions are always illuminating to me when I get into character. But interesting, that chippy thing it's for me, it's changed now in the sense that I feel that as I've got older, I can see the advantages. I don't think of it as chippy. I think of it more as knowing my worth, holding my worth.
And distinctive?
Distinctive, but also seeing in the big, kaleidoscope that is me, that there is some stuff that I'm really good at or positive. There are those positive things. And some of that comes from the fight.
Right.
And, and not giving up and, the knocks. And that is something that I can jump out of bed with sometimes.
Because it always strikes me that an actor's got to be quite personally, emotionally, spiritually resilient.
Yeah,
you get a lot of rejections as as lots of applause.
There's a real dichotomy, I think, as an actor, because you have to be open. You have to be open to your emotions. And also that's where all the gold is. You're going to use all that. So you have to sort of be open to the world. You have to, your ears and your eyes and your emotions have to be available. But you also have to grow a thick skin.
Right.
And those two things can fight each other sometimes. And, I've seen it a lot. I've done it myself where someone will give me a note or you'll read some criticism and your natural thing is to shut down and go, don't talk to me like that. Or, yeah, I already know that. And actually, you have to sort of resist that and try and be open to that criticism, trying to be open to that note or what someone is saying to you because, there's work to be done.
I hate to tell you, this is exactly the same as being a politician. Because on the one hand, we get a load of abuse, and you could just develop such a thick skin, and you have to have a thick enough skin not to kind of be blown over the moment anybody. I'm mixing my metaphors now, but you just the moment anybody says boo to you, you can't just run away. But at the same time, if you develop a really thick skin, then you can't hear, you're not sensitive to what is going on around you.
I can really see that. I mean, and the other thing, it's to do with, I presume we'll talk about this as well, is we're getting forced into this national debate or international debate, which is very binary. You're either for or against. And my role as an actor, and I presume it's the same as a politician sometimes, is to be in the middle bit. The nuance bit.
Oh, try being nuanced as a politician.
And that's really, it's really difficult.
Yeah.
But that's where most of us live.
Yeah.
The person I am on a Tuesday morning is probably going to change on Tuesday afternoon. I do have my values and I have my principles and things like that. But my opinions change, with more information or when I get, and also who we are as human beings is complex and it's difficult and it's inconsistent. And I think as a human being, but also when I look at characters I play, I'm much more interested in that inconsistency and what throws me off my certainty, what makes me question myself, and that's about looking at your vulnerability. And that's the really difficult things there because they're difficult for everyone. But I do find them difficult as a man. There's something as a man we're not supposed to do that. That's sort of gender conditioning. And I challenge that in myself and quite often fail as well. It's about how do I live in this world, be open, be vulnerable, but also protect the hurt and the upset that I feel around it,
I want to go back to another word you used earlier, which was ambition. Because, again, if you compare politics with, being an actor, it's generally thought to be a bad idea to be ambitious in politics. But actually, if you're not ambitious enough, then, you're just going to sit at the back of the room and you're never going to get elected to anything, are you? And you won't. And if your ambition is to change the world, and then you have to use your personality to be able to achieve that. But I just wonder what ambition looks like as an actor. Is it just always to play Hamlet at the right age and then King Lear at the right age, or? Well,
ambition is a really interesting word because it's got a bad press, hasn't it? There's something around that where, if you say to someone you're very ambitious, it's a slight.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's because you're looking at someone who's ambitious for themselves. They're ambitious for self. They want all the kudos that goes around it and things like that. And there's an idea around that they'll trample on anyone to get where they want and what they want. But for me, that ambition is a sense of challenging yourself, that you have goals, that you have an idea that, now, even at my age now, I think, well, where can I find those challenges? Where can I, still feel in love with what I do and be illuminated by what I do? And that's to do with having ambition in my work rather than for myself. That's important for me. And I do think that, I can look at my life or look at my work and I think, okay, what you're choosing through it is to be challenged all the time. I think we can see sometimes when people are ambitious for themselves. I work essentially in a collaborative industry. And it's only as good as the people around me. It's only,
somebody gets to play the lead.
yeah, and sometimes the squeaky wheel gets all the grease, So you have to sort of manage that. You have to be inside a community where some people are the lead, some people are, more ensemble than others is the great expression. But you do have that. It does have a structure. It has a hierarchical structure. And certainly now in terms of, how we sell product and, what brings eyes to a film or a telly or a play, those things, you do have status in that. But that doesn't necessarily need to translate in that status being a dick swinging exercise inside the work itself.
Right.
Everyone, I've worked in companies which have huge lead actors who are very, very famous, and it's very collegiate.
Right.
And I've been in the opposite. And, my desire is obviously to work in that environment where you think, okay, this is where we're all working together. There is a sense that, if you're playing Hamlet, then you are shaping the project in a way that the person who's the third spear carrier isn't. But the atmosphere of the work can still be collegiate, I think.
Funnily enough, I think you have a podcast of your own, don't you?
I do.
and I think you interviewed Jonathan Pryce recently, didn't you? Yeah. And I remember going to see Jonathan Pryce's Hamlet many, many moons ago, obviously back in the 1980s. An amazing production. I think Jill Bennett played his mother.
Yeah, it was Richard Eyre, I think.
That's right, yes. And in fact, oddly, I met the person who played the player Queen quite recently as well. Okay. But there's an element of tradition in theatre, isn't there?
There is, yeah. But also, what's great about Shakespeare, obviously, is it's always speaking to our times. That's what's wonderful about it. And we can see, they're doing The Tempest at the moment. They're just about to do Much Ado About Nothing, things like that. It's always around, not just because it's part of our national curriculum, but because the plays speak to us right now. They always are. That's his genius, really.
And you were at the Bridge, I think, weren't you?
I did. I did Julius Caesar at the Bridge. I played Mark Antony. So, that was very prescient in terms of our political situation, and always will be, because we're always living in flux. And I think, but also Shakespeare in terms of love and loss and grief and desire, the way he expresses that in his characters is timeless.
I think of you as a drama actor rather than a comedy actor. Is that a decision, or is it just what comes through the door?
A little bit of both,
and
really.
I know you've been doing some comedy, and you're about to do it again, aren't you?
Yeah, I did a thing for BBC called Daddy Issues, and we just had to do the second version. I also did a play, Mark McDonagh play, called Hangman in the West End, which was very funny. I have done I did Inside Number 9 and stuff like that.
Of course.
But yeah, I think I am seen in a more serious light, and I guess there is something around me that is drawn to those parts, particularly as a young man. I was very confused as a young man, as an actor, in terms of this word that I was obsessed with, which was authenticity. And I wanted to portray people who you felt were real,
right?
That they were true, that their emotions were real, and that they had this authenticity. And weirdly, as a younger man, I always felt that that authenticity was only found in the darker side of life, that it was only found in heartbreak and the gutter and sort of crisis. And I never believed that authenticity could be in love and laughter and communal sort of life. There was a schism that happened to me as a younger man.
That sounds unhappy.
It wasn't not happy. It was. I sort of recognize now that I was in crisis. Definitely, right. There was some sort of crisis happening, and I was playing out something that was going on inside me. I brilliantly and thankfully I had an arena which was acting to be able to explore that stuff inside me via character. It was like one step removed, but I was able to explore it. But it was to do with that sense that I didn't want to appear in any way to be frivolous. Right. And it was very interesting because this brings me out, maybe this is where we know each other, but so when I played Gordon Brown,
Yeah,
There's a really interesting
no frivolity there.
So, but also not only is there no frivolity, but there was frivolity and lightness in the personal.
Right.
Whenever I spoke to people who knew him,
Yeah.
they would talk about that. They would talk about him joking and laughing and sort of being very funny and quick, and stuff. Whereas we never saw that. And I felt that when I was playing him, that you had to get that sense of the public man was, because he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, he had to present this serious person because he had the
prudent with a purpose.
Yeah, and that fitted into his character.
Mm-hmm.
And he would never be smiley or jokey or whatever in public. And that was really, that must have been such a hard thing for him to hold on to.
But I mean, I said this before we started chatting, which was just that reference to As You Like It, that one man in his time plays many parts.
Yeah.
I mean, I do feel in a sense that in politics you play a series of different parts. And but when, one wants to be authentic too. And I would say that one of the problems for the modern politician is that when you're on television, the one thing you can smell through a television is a lack of authenticity in somebody's answer. You can smell it. Yeah. Now, it's difficult to manufacture authenticity, and I cannot tell you how many times I hate when somebody says, this is a yes or no answer, and you go,
it's not.
But
That's the binary. That's the binary
it's,
stuff, though, isn't it? That's exactly what we need. I mean, we need now, because we're in such flux, we need certainty.
Yeah.
And my worry is that certainty only exists on the extremes because the debate is everything. And I feel that, it's interesting in that television age, because we've always been in a television age, but something's changed around the social media, I think. And it's to do with this fact that we're not allowed to debate. Changing your mind is a weakness. We're not allowed to sort of look at both sides. That's a weakness. We're not allowed to sort of to say the thing that was a real revelation to me as a person, was this thing where I was able to say, I don't know. And when I realized and gave myself license to say, I don't know, that was a real, I grew. I could see then that I could enter I didn't have to know everything. And I used to think, I need to know everything. I need to, and this was to do with my education as well. I never wanted to be seen to be ignorant or not knowing stuff. And so I would read voraciously. I would and the worst thing for me would to walk into a situation and someone say, how do you pronounce this word? Or did you know this thing happened? And you'd be like, I have no idea. And I would be shamed by it. Absolutely. They didn't mean to shame me, but I would be so full of shame. And the day I sort of decided to say it was okay for me to say, oh, I didn't know that. I don't know that. Oh, I have no idea. That was like, oh, great, because that meant that I then had space to go and find out, or I didn't have to sort of wear this badge all the time. And it's difficult for a politician, I guess, on television, because you're supposed to know that. And also, the person who's talking to you 9 times out of 10 is trying to catch you out.
Yes, there's quite a bit of that. I used to love The West Wing TV series, though I found it always very difficult to hear, and I watched it with subtitles. Okay. I don't know whether that's about my hearing or whatever it is, but what I liked about it was that it's one of the very few programs. I mean, there's loads of programs, showing the idiocy of politics. I get that. Yet whether it's Yes Prime Minister or it's The Veep or The Thick of It or whatever, I get all of that, and I love all of that too. But just sometimes I wish there would be a drama which sort of showed the real drama that happens in politics, which is people making difficult decisions between a really bad decision or a slightly less bad decision, because you haven't got an option of a really good decision, and all of those kind of nuanced sort of discussions that you have, but that just doesn't seem to be part of the commissioning equation.
And also I think the other thing is that you have a amplification of one sentence or one word that you've said in an hour's interview. Yeah. And that becomes the message that goes out.
Oh, I remember Sherwood, the second series. Obviously, you're the lead, I guess. And I remember the first thing I knew that the second series was happening was somebody condemning the fact that the sheriff of Nottingham was a lesbian.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, really?
Watch the show, you know. And also because the person who did that thought we were doing the Robin Hood.
Yes,
show.
So he wasn't Men in Tights,
and it wasn't.
No.
You know, so there was those things. So James
Julian
Graham came
Clary
out.
did that for Christmas, for the Christmas Panto, I think.
And James Graham came out and sort of, I think, pulled that guy out and just said, "Look, you know, I think you've got this wrong."
Yeah.
But you know, that's the world we're living in. It's quite scary.
Talk to me about broadcast, because a lot of your work is TV, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'd say over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I do theatre. I've just did a play last year in Bath, which was 2 pinter plays. I'm doing a play next year. So yeah, I mean, I do go back to the theatre, but mostly it's television.
Television, you know, big production budget. It's essentially the license fee is a massive production budget, £3.75 billion a year. We've done well in recent years with film and tax credits for high-end television, things like that. I just wonder, have you got concerns about the direction that television's going in the UK?
I think the main channels are, you know, their output is really amazing. I think BBC, ITV and Channel 4 do really challenging drama. I think doing very diverse drama. I think the streamers are a different entity because they're such a global place. And so...
But a phenomenal amount of it made here.
Yeah,
the really top level
lots of it
stuff
made
here, though not necessarily with intellectual property that remains here.
Yeah, and also I think, you know, but there are those independent production companies that are from the UK that are vying for that space. I sometimes feel that what streamers are looking for are returning series. So if something does well, they want the second, third, fourth, fifth and stuff. And sometimes I wish they would have more contained stories in themselves, like a 3-part or something like that, because a lot of stories do have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that thing that's just carrying on.
Queen's Gambit, I remember. I mean, that wasn't a long one. It was never going to return, was it?
Yeah, but it was a great. It's a great example of something that you went, this is a great story.
Yeah,
and so more investment in those things, I think. But also, you know, shows are being made here. You know, the studios are quite full, so and we still have the greatest crews, I think, in the world. So people will come here. The more, you know, obviously tax credits is something that will bring people to us, you know, and that's really important.
Yeah, and how do you see that your kind of next 10 years? How does ambition fit into that then?
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I mean, I think there's lots of stuff that's.
Are you going to do Lear?
No, not in the next 10 years. Maybe.
Adrian Lester told me he was going to do Lear.
Right, okay. We'll let him do that one. No, you know, I mean, it seems odd. I've never really had a plan in that sense. I like to sort of just see what comes at me. I'm also someone who likes to sort of say yes and find out what it is afterwards. So I like, what I look for now is obviously characters that I haven't played before. I'm looking for those challenges, arenas that I haven't played before. You know, comedy I'm doing now, probably theatre stuff as well.
Baddies?
I do a lot of baddies, so it would be nice to do somebody that changes that. But also, it's the people I want to work with. I look at people and I think I'd want to work with him. I want to work with her. They're doing good stuff. You know, writers, directors, other actors. I want to be around talented people. So I'm looking for the projects that excite me. Right. But I'm really excited about the next 10 years. I think there's going to be really good stuff as long as I don't get, you know, somebody AIs me somewhere, you know.
Well, we might have legislation to help with that.
Oh, thank you.
But just one final question, sort of policy-wise from me, which is around, you know, it's a fact I've often quoted, which is that Albert Finney and Glenda Jackson were born on the same day. 2 working-class actors, did phenomenally well on the international stage, and, you know, on the physical stage, and in film and everything. I have worried for some time about how does a working-class lad or girl end up getting into in being a star today?
It's really difficult. And, there's a number of things that, one is the stars, the people who become actors, the people who come into the profession. But also there's the arts itself as something that we need in our life. So my big thing is about how we treat the arts in state education. Mm-hmm. Not because we want people to become artists or musicians or actors, but just because it's essential to us as people. I think, the policy in England is different to the policy in Wales, for example.
It is.
And I think in England, the first question I give myself when I'm looking at a part is, what's it like to be that person? Yeah. So I start from an empathetic question right off the bat. And I think all art's first question is empathetic. What's that like? Who is this person? How do I, transform this empty canvas into something else? What journey do I need to go on? Those things. And that curiosity, that questioning, that desire is something that feeds us as human beings. Not just for people who go on into the profession, but it feeds your critical gene. And we need that as a race. And that's being undermined, I think, in state education. The thing I'm about to do after Daddy Issues is set in a public school.
Right.
So I've been going to many public schools to do some research, which has been really fascinating for me. But, I see you got less for doing media studies or acting or, drama or music or design than you did for doing maths and sciences and stuff like that. So you're literally telling a group of people, that's not for you. Don't concentrate on this in state education. Whilst in public schools, they have theatres that would rival the West End and orchestras that, can...
So and a pottery kiln and an art room and so all the rest. So they know that they know it's your mate.
And it's also, they're also able, to do their education in the classroom, but also they have this extracurricular thing, which is, in the state education, that doesn't exist. So it's how do we do that? And I get it, because the arts is hard to mark. It's a hard thing to mark because it's about taste. It's about, when you look at the maths and science, it's about logic and reason. And I would suggest that logic and reason are the antithesis of the arts, particularly at the birth of the idea. Mm. So what you're doing is, it's a hard thing to go, you get a 9 out of 10 or whatever, because what it is it's about, it's much more about a feeling and an atmosphere, and you're trying to promote critical anarchy thinking sometimes. That's where it comes from. And so it when you're looking at your league tables and stuff, there's a pressure on your educational establishment sometimes, because, sometimes you might have this brilliant pupil, but they're not inside the sort of the curriculum that needs to be marked at the end of it.
But, well, as you know, I mean, we've said that we're reviewing the curriculum, and I mean, my personal feeling is you haven't had a proper education if you haven't also had a proper creative education.
But how do you mark that? How does a school
in
that's
part,
under pressure?
I don't mind. My brother was in Oklahoma.
Right.
I don't care whether he was any good or not.
Uh-huh.
He was in Oklahoma, and he knew how to stand on a stage and not be terrified, and have self-confidence, and be part of a team. Mm-hmm. And if something went wrong on the stage, how everybody had to respond to it. All of that. Mm. And I just think that's really important. And the other thing, I was struck with what you were just saying, and we probably ought to end with this because we could go on, I think, for quite a long time, but is that I think there's a difference between sympathy and empathy.
100%.
And often the news enables us to feel sympathy for what's happening to people in Yemen or wherever it may be, or LA at the moment. But actually what drama can do is enable us to feel empathy.
Yeah, I never want anybody to feel sympathetic for my characters. In fact, it's I never want to be looking at playing a character and thinking, please give me your sympathy. But I always want people to be empathetic to my characters. I want them to have an understanding of where my decisions are coming from and the world I operate inside. That's important for me.
And in a curious way, that's why I think that the Postmaster series on ITV was so much more effective than 100 news reports.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also there'll be more dramas like that. I think, I mean, I grew up with, Edge of Darkness, which was a great drama, which you really did get an insight into a world that the news wasn't giving you.
So we're going to do a quick fire round. My first question to you is, what's the one country in the world that you would love to visit but you haven't yet done?
So South America, really. That's my big thing. So just before lockdown, that's what I was planning, was this big trip in South America, starting in Mexico, Central America, and then coming down. And I never got to do it. And so that's my big thing now, is to try and rekindle that and do some South America, really.
I've been a lot, funny enough. Yeah, when I was training to be a priest, I did some of my training in Peru, in a shantytown in Lima, and then working for a human rights organization in Buenos Aires. So I know Latin America quite well. Your go.
Okay. How often do you go to the theatre in your life?
Not quite as much as I'd like. I know we went 9 times last year because we counted.
9 times in the year?
In the year, yes.
Right.
And I would want it to be more like, go at least once a month. We went 21 times to the movies.
Right.
We've just counted it, bizarrely, because we're kind of setting our ambitions for this year.
And so your ambitions for this year are what?
To go at least once a month to the theatre. Okay. And the next thing I'm going to is Richard II. Oddly, when I was very young, I played O'Merle, Weeps, my tender-hearted cousin in Richard II. So I've got the whole cast coming into Parliament.
And can I ask, just a rider to that, is how much of that theatre viewing was outside of London?
Not much. Not much is the truth. Okay. Yeah, I saw Adrian Brody do his show at the Donmar Warehouse. That was obviously London. Yeah. Nearly everything was in London.
Yeah. Can you make a commitment to see stuff out of?
Yes, that's my aim. The really difficult bit is just diary.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, so tonight, I'm going to be in Newcastle, but I'm not getting there till 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And I think it's a real problem that so much theatre is concentrated.
I think that London-centric arts thing is really troubling, and so I know it's being combated, but that's something that we need to focus on.
Yeah.
Okay. If you could change one policy in terms of, obviously going to change lots of policies, hopefully, but in terms of school education and the arts, what would it be?
I think the single most important thing is to make sure that every single child gets the same artistic opportunities in school as, a kid who goes to Eton.
Right.
If there's another policy which is not my portfolio that I'd change, it's how we deal with acquired brain injury.
Oh, right, okay.
I think it's a massive, completely unhidden problem out there, the number of kids who've had brain injuries and end up in the criminal justice system because the brain injury was never treated. That's one of my kind of passions, and it stems partly from being the MP for Rhondda and Ogbor, because so many rugby players had concussion after concussion after concussion, never looked after, and then they get early onset dementia, they get cognitive problems, depression, anxiety, suicide, all of that.
Is it possible to police social media?
Oh, Lord. There are elements that you can, certainly, and the Online Safety Act does a little bit of that, and Ofcom has some powers, which it gets. The way the law was drafted under the previous government means that bits come into force year after year after year, and so there's more that will come in force this spring and this summer under Ofcom. But there's bits of it, how did we allow anonymity?
Yeah.
To dominate,
I know.
The way we engage with the world. Personally, I hardly look at social media now.
But
I've decided it's no good for me.
Yeah, but that's because of the position you're in. Certainly around young people. I know there's legislation coming in, but that's really dangerous, I think. I want to ask about Elon Musk, but maybe we shouldn't.
You can ask about Elon Musk, but you can do what you want.
Okay. How do we deal with people like Elon Musk and Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos? I mean, and their influence over politicians and government.
Well, I'm not a big fan of one country telling people from one country telling another country what to do. I'm rather in favour of the people of Britain telling the politicians of Britain what to do and choosing who they want as their politicians. Secondly, I think oligarchy is very rarely good for society or for consumers or for people.
But how do we deal with it?
Oh, well, I mean, that's I was going to say $6 billion question, but it's probably the $6 trillion question when you're talking about the amount of money that some of these deep pockets have. And I think sometimes we have to do that in cooperation with other countries because, social media knows no boundaries or no frontiers. But I think simple appeals to human decency don't always work.
And do you think things will have to get worse before they get better in that arena?
Well, I think I'm actually cautiously optimistic that in the end, voters and consumers, or human beings, as we normally think of ourselves, will sort of rebel against a world which sets one set of people against another. And forces us always to choose, are you in this camp or in that camp? Are you for me or against me? I mean, human beings are streaky. And so I have that optimism about human nature.
Okay. Good. History is...
against me.
History has sort of flown in the face of that at times.
Well, no, sometimes history ends up turning it over, doesn't it? I mean, some of the worst things that happened in the 20th century... We fought up. We rose up against and fought in the end. But what we should never think is that the ideologues and the brutal dictatorships of the past are all in the past.
Yes.